So welcome to those joining us on the recording. You're joining for the Creativity for Health and Wellbeing webinar. And we're really excited to hear from two excellent speakers on this topic this evening. It's going to be, first of all, we're going to hear from Jayne Howard, and then we're going to pass over to Geraldine Montgomery. So I'll introduce Jayne first of all. Jayne is the founder and director of Arts Well, CIC, which is a social enterprise that champions the role of creativity in health and well-being. And her belief is really in the power of creativity in the arts to transform well-being in communities and individuals. And this belief is grounded in a career in education and the NHS for over 15 years, initiating, advising, collaborating on arts-based health projects in Cornwall, where she's based. And she's really got a passion for arts and the power of partnerships. So really looking forward to hearing from Jayne this evening. I'll invite you to unmute and share now, Jayne.
Great, thank you. Thank you very much for inviting me, and great to see so many of you here. We're on a really strict time schedule here, so forgive me if I launch straight into this, and I think Flo's going to give me a note if we start to get into delays. So yeah, thanks for the introduction, Flo. So I've been working exclusively in this sector, the arts and health sector, for over 15 years now, and in that time I've seen both the sort of range and scope of work increase dramatically, and support for the work has increased. So 15 years ago, I spent a lot of time knocking on the doors of health and social care and creative and cultural organisations, trying to, generate interest and enthusiasm for this work. And it was a hard slog. And that's a very different picture nowadays. I think there's, real recognition of the value of this work. And the demand for it really outstrips the supply. Unfortunately, the resources can't keep up with the demand for the work, I think. So it's a really great context at the moment to be working in. And I think it's really important to say this work isn't just sort of nice to do. It's not just a nice add-on and a pleasant experience for people. I believe it's absolutely essential to who we are as humans. We're intrinsically creative, and there's a lovely quote I like from Ellen Diseniaki, who says, "It is as natural for people to make art as it is for wolves to howl." And I think that's what underpins my sort of belief in this work. And just to reference something very recently, there's a report or a series of reports coming out looking at people's experiences under COVID-19 and under lockdown. It's research done by UCL. That research is showing that engaging in creative activity has been the most effective protector of people's mental health and well-being through lockdown. So that's even when you consider it alongside things like exercise and volunteering. It's the most effective protector of mental health and well-being, which is really interesting. The worst thing you can do is read the newspapers and listen to the news. So curate your news. So I'm just going to talk very briefly with some examples about how participation in arts activity can benefit individuals, communities, and wider society. And I'm going to illustrate that with examples of projects I've been involved in. I think the individual level is the one that most of us are familiar with. It's the one where there's been most research. There's lots of examples of that, and many of you will have your own examples of where an individual has been sort of transformed through participation in an arts activity. And that's often about improving confidence, self-esteem, motivation, communication, problem solving, socializing skills, self-expression, a whole range of things. And I'm just going to give you one short example. This is a guy, let's call him Tom. This was a project at a GP surgery at a coastal town in Cornwall. A few years ago. It was an early example of social prescribing, where we were running a weekly arts and crafts group for people who were referred from the GP surgery. It was run by a really experienced facilitator. So Tom was the main carer, primary carer for his elderly mother. He lived alone. We lived with her. He was very withdrawn, very isolated. He came to the group. It was the only thing he did in the week. It was the only time he went out in the week, but he did come along to the group. He walked in, very first few sessions, he would walk in, his body language was very, he was very insular, very hunched. He didn't make eye contact. He would sit in the corner of the room and work over a piece of artwork that he would then screw up and throw away in frustration. Fast forward 12 months, and here he is at an exhibition of all the work that was made by this group at a prestigious arts venue in Cornwall, standing proudly smiling in front of his artwork, which we also used for the poster, a big bold lino cut. He'd got there, he had a lift from people in the group, and he was going home with other people in the group. His circumstances hadn't changed. He was still the primary carer for his mother, and there was still very little that he did other than come to this group. But the transformation in himself was just, it was just so obvious. It was fantastic to see. So lots of participants talk about how participation in arts activity sort of connects them to themselves and gives life more meaning. I think the second issue I want to look at is how the arts can bring communities together, fostering a sort of sense of community and appreciation of others, sort of widening people's experiences and understanding of their community. And again, I'll illustrate this with a project a few years ago. It's one of my favourite projects I was involved in, called the Free Spirits of Penryn. Penryn is a small town in Cornwall. It's where our office was located at the time. And we ran a project whereby we invited people in over a period of 5 days. We invited residents of Penryn to come into the office and to, with one single strip of plasticine, to make a model of their free spirit, what would be their free spirit. And then we put these in a big installation in a shop window in the town. It was amazing. We had over 100 people come during that week, people from all walks of life in Penryn, from all ages. Adults would bring their children in, and their children would be, you know, would have finished the activity, and the adults would still be sitting around chatting and making more figures. We had the mayor come. I'd been in Penryn for 4 years by then in the office, and this was the first time I would say that I understood what Penryn was about, and I really began to love it. And so we built connections between individuals, between our organisation and the community, and between businesses and the community. Again, just a really impressive project. And then I think thirdly is the issue about the wider society. So the arts can really help to address sort of big social issues. Over several years now, I've worked with a homelessness charity here in Cornwall on a number of projects. And 3 years ago, we began to work on a campaign to end street homelessness in Cornwall. And it started with an exhibition of artwork that was made by their clients, and followed following year by a poetry book, which was also contained work made by clients. And Amanda, who's here this evening, was part of that project. This toured around, both of these toured around the county, and what these did, they put the voice of these street homeless people who often don't have a voice, they put them at the centre of the campaign. It really touched people, it really made people aware of our shared humanity, it raised awareness, and it really motivated the staff and leaders in that organisation, but also in other organisations. So we kick-started conversations and actions and really changed the way that people work together on this really important issue. We had real success in the first, these first 3 years of this campaign. There's still a lot more to do. But again, an example of how the arts, I think, can really ignite people in a different way. We all knew the figures, we all knew the information, but what we were seeing here was something quite different.
Just to let you know, you've got 1 minute left.
1 minute, there we go, it's tough. The other thing I just wanted to touch on then is the partnership that's essential, I think, between the statutory sector, the voluntary and community sector, and the creative industries and creative businesses. I think it's really key to delivering these programmes. So I think the sectors can come together at the community level. So social prescribing is an example of that, where we have GPs who prescribe an activity for somebody, which might be delivered by a voluntary and community organisation or by a freelance artist. There's a sort of skills and knowledge exchange that I think is really important. So creative practitioners learning about the 5 ways to wellbeing, for example, as a way of informing their practice and their creative activities, and the other way around, you know, inviting health and social care leaders to think about creative ways of engaging people in discussions about their health and social care services. And also very much at a strategic level, so embedding creativity as a way of delivering positive social impacts, and that's certainly something we're working on in Cornwall with the establishment of a strategic partnership for health and wellbeing. So I'm just going to end with a quote from the Creative Health, which was an all-party parliamentary group report. I'll put the link to it in the chat, which came out 3 years ago. And it says quite clearly, the arts can keep us well, aid our recovery, and support longer lives better lived. That's me done. Thank you very much. Lots more I could say. I'm very happy for you to contact me afterwards.
So much, Jane, and yeah, it's really wonderful, and we will include links to Jayne's work in the follow-up email afterwards, but I'll invite everyone, if you, it's hard to show your appreciation sometimes on Zoom, but there is a reactions button at the bottom, so you can give a remote round of applause or thumbs up to, if you can find that. If you can't find it, you can always just wave in appreciation. Thank you so much. That was really, really inspiring, Jayne, and I see you've already inspired people with different ideas from responses in the chat. As my colleague Roger mentioned, there will be a Q&A section. Roger mentioned in the chat box, I mean. So if you have questions for Jayne or for Geraldine, who I'm about to hand over to now, do pop them in the chat. Roger, my colleague, is keeping an eye on them, and we'll get to them after the presentation. But for now, I want to hand over to our next speaker for this evening, which is Geraldine Montgomery, who coordinates the work of the Leeds Arts, Health and Wellbeing Network. Geraldine is a practicing artist and a charity trustee who has worked in primary care mental health services, drug treatment and criminal justice and the criminal justice system in Leeds. She's a really busy person, really interested in achieving a better balance in offering, asking for and accepting help. And she really enjoys kind of solving problems and championing constructive kind of solutions. So we're really excited to hear from Geraldine this evening, and yeah, like sharing your experiences from Leeds.
Oh, thank you for such a wonderful introduction, Flo. So I'm fortunate to recognise a few faces here today from our Arts and Health Network, and it's wonderful to have some people that know my work, but also so I can celebrate their work. So we have one of our facilitators from Leeds Art Gallery who's doing a wonderful project around developing a medicinal garden with creative art from people just interested in creativity, expression and learning new skills to go in Leeds General Infirmary. And it's kind of projects that bring together ideas about health and creative expression that might, you know, benefit our lives, from changing our environments to occupying us in new and interesting ways, to bringing us together, that I'm really fascinated in the area of arts and health. One of the things that I was speaking about with Flo about what I might bring to today was just to think about how arts can engage us and make other things more accessible. So whether it's changing our environment, such as art projects that we've been doing in Leeds in neglected areas, bridges, underpasses, ginnels we call them in the area, which is kind of like an alleyway between often hundreds of years old between people's properties and locations, that we can redecorate and re-envisage as a community. It can be how we plan events, so that we think more about sustainability. So when we're providing food or materials, we bring attention to that, and that helps to prompt changes in how we live our lives more generally. It can be about how we share important information. So at Leeds University, we've been looking at how we give information about cancer and dementia together, and how the use of design and images and sort of visual materials really helps to convey messages so much better than text. So I'll be focusing on visual arts today, but my work encompasses a much broader idea of what the arts can be. Something else I've been talking about a lot in the network, and that has been coming out of discussions with many community arts organisations, is how participatory arts can really help to foster trust between people. It can be a shortcut, such as playing sports, to feeling part of a team and part of a community and part of a group. How we busy our hands when we're drawing, creating craft, doing mindfulness practice that's artistic. So we may not be working towards an end goal of a beautiful product. It might be just the enjoyment of using creative resources, and that has a knock-on effect of giving a shared focus and a shared ambition. Oh, I don't know what that noise is. Yeah, also arts can be adapted so that it can be a practice that brings people in who might be excluded from other community activities. So whether we're adapting the delivery of our events online to include subtitling, so people who have limited digital capacity can fully participate, whether it's overcoming barriers that older people might experience in the arts. So in Yorkshire Dance in Leeds, we're looking at voguing with over 55-year-olds. So something that's very much part of the New York dance history, the idea of really expressive dance but with new audiences, I find really fascinating. And in creative arts practice, bringing new materials such as textiles to different groups is part of what can reconnect people to a wider community. I've been speaking with Rose Sinclair, who's a textiles lecturer at Goldsmiths, about how bringing together Caribbean textiles and materials and objects can create a dialogue of trust where people are connected to their family's history, their backgrounds, the smells and textures of their childhood. And I think arts, visual arts, textiles and a wider sense of culture can really develop our community and our links to each other. So there's so much potential around arts and creative practice to benefit our connections to each other and our sense of well-being and safety and comfort. Another thing that we're noticing, which Jayne's touched on quite a lot, is about how place-based approaches, like community-based approaches and approaches that are maybe linked to our values and what's important to us, seem to be so important during COVID. So maybe before the pandemic, we had a focus on arts as venues and as being audiences, but now's an opportunity for us to feel much more engaged and important as individuals in arts. So not just looking at somebody doing something artistic, but having an opportunity to become more artistic ourselves. Something that we've been looking at Leeds, I'm part of developing a conference on arts and health later this year, and we've been looking at some of the research that has been done by UCL that Jayne touched on. So last year the BBC did a piece of research about how even a very small amount of creativity can help us cope with the stresses and pressures of modern life. So that could be by providing a distraction, so that if we've got difficulties in our lives that we're unable to deal with, for example, a bereavement or a change in our working life that we don't have any power over, arts and culture can distract us and give us a breather and give us some respite from that. It can also give an opportunity to process. So through creative writing techniques, such as ones that I've discussed with Kimmy Robinson, who's fortunately here tonight from Keep Real UK, we can use text and to explore our feelings and experiences and thoughts, and to come to a greater understanding of where we are at the moment, processing and understanding our situation in a way that maybe is easier to do through creative activity than just through trying to think kind of clearly in conversation. You can go into new routes and ideas through creative practice. Something else.
You've got 1 minute to go.
Okay, that's good. I could, again, like Jayne, I feel like I could talk forever. But there's been some really fascinating research that came out last year, led by UCL researcher Daisy Fancourt, as part of the World Health Organization in Europe, looking at the evidence of how arts can improve health and well-being. And this study looked over 3,000 different research papers, and it was so extensive. So the actual art forms are really varied, but the impact on chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, so lifelong breathing problems, diabetes, recovering from cancer, recovering from surgery, that the power of the arts to have benefits in these areas is really fascinating. And there's so much interest in things that aren't invasive, that are low risk, that are an alternative to pharmacological options. So really interested in how these can actually be applied in our everyday life, and how people tell me that music can really help recovery from illness and improve mood, as we can kind of be transported and time travel through listening to music to different places and different points in our life. So I'm very happy to add some links in the chat about some of this research, some of the repositories from this arts and health information that has been developed, particularly over the last 20 years. But one of the things that we talk about in our network is that not everything that counts can be counted. Very much what we get out of arts and health, as well as a wealth of evidence, is what we actually experience. So that really leads on so well to our workshops today, and I'm hopeful that as we reconvene at the end we might see some benefits for ourselves in the sessions today.
Thank you for that wonderful lead on, Geraldine, and a wonderful presentation. And again, inviting people, if they would like to give a round of applause on Zoom through the reactions button or thumbs up. And so lovely that so many people are joining this evening from your network in Leeds, from the LAHWN network in Leeds. It's yeah, really wonderful to have such a geographically wide group. So thanks everyone for being here. So like Geraldine so wonderfully led on to, we are going to lead into the workshops shortly. I can see if anyone has any questions for Jayne or Geraldine, now is a good moment to ask them, because we will be having 30 minutes in the breakout rooms when we go into our workshops, and then when we come back we're going to be hearing back from each of the workshops and then hearing a final word from Jayne and Geraldine, but there won't be an opportunity for questions other than right just now. So if you do have any questions, do feel free to write those in the chat box. And whilst you're reflecting on that possibility of questions, that I'm going to just share in the chat box the list of groups that we're going to split out into this evening. And I just I would invite you to rename yourself with the number of the group that you would like to be in, ideally with the group that you signed up to be in when you filled out the registration form, because all being well you will be automatically funneled into that group. But and if you're not sure how to rename yourself, you can just hover over your picture on Zoom and select the 3 blue dots, and then you'll see an option to rename, and then you can put the number of your chosen workshop. So number 1, Friendship Braid Craft Along. Number 2, Mindful Sketching. Number 3, Are You a Leaf or a Tree? Haiku Workshop. Number 4, Reframe Your Now, Mindful Photography. And number 5, Writing for Self-Connection and Self-Expression, which was initially, a few of you might have seen it as Writing for Wellbeing. So hopefully that is clear. If you said you didn't mind, then no worries, leave yourself without a number. That's totally fine and appreciated. And yeah, brilliant if you can just rename yourself rather than putting it in the chat, just so that it's easier to see when people are in the correct groups. So for those watching on the recording, I'm going to pause the recording momentarily now, because we're going to go into creative workshops shortly, but we'll come back to the recording in a minute.
It's for our well-being. So yeah, we made our friendship braids, but also listen to each other's stories.
That sounds really wonderful, Lisa, and thank you so much, and thank you for sharing the comments in the chat about how that experience was. Just to say welcome back to those joining us on the recording. You're listening to the summaries of the workshops that we've just all experienced, and it's been a really lovely interactive experience. So next we'll hand over to the facilitator of group 2, Rebecca, who ran Mindful Sketching, to share a brief highlights from your session.
Okay, so hi there. I think the time flew over quite quickly, like everybody mentioned, and like Lisa just mentioned. I think the feedback from the session was that it was enjoyable, and it was actually quite relaxing to actually do, quite peaceful, getting people, you're doing it in a mindful way. So it starts off with an in the moment piece to begin with, and then you start thinking about looking at your hand, looking away, actually sketching and feeling the marks on the paper. And I think people really seem to have come up and surprised themselves with the images that they've managed to create. So that's actually been quite nice, and that's the whole point of it. Ultimately, you free your mind, so you're not so focused on actually the completed piece of work. It's actually, to start with, it's just about the mark making, and you're less focused on the actual piece of work at the end of it. So I think it went down quite well.
Wonderful, sounds beautiful. Big thumbs up from Josh. Thanks for your artwork, Josh, and thanks Rebecca for the summary. I think that that feeling of like surprising yourself is something that is really beautiful, that can come from creativity. So far Lisa's shared about the kind of storytelling elements of creativity that can come up, and Rebecca's shared, you know, that fact that you can kind of surprise yourself in the process. Really lovely sharing, thank you. I'm going to hand over to our third out of 5 workshop facilitators, Amanda, to share about her workshop, Are You a Leaf or a Tree, aka haikus. Amanda.
Hi, we had a really, oh, can you hear me? Yeah, you can hear me. Okay, we had a really lovely session. I wanted it to go on forever. Asking lots of questions. So we started with just that question, are you a leaf or a tree? Which is really a way of getting into, starting to think about creative ideas and writing, but in a way that's really unstressful and also not thinking too much. So I fired out a lot of questions. I managed to type them up as well, to do with sort of building up an individual picture of what you think you are. If you're a leaf, what you can see, what you can smell, what you can touch, what you worry about. And out of that comes a sort of sense of where you are at, really. And at the end, we only had actually 6 minutes, because I thought it was going on till 45, but to put them together, some of the ideas into a haiku form, which is a short 3-line poem of 575 syllables, a kind of general guideline. And I think Sylvie's got a copy of some of the amazing haikus that came out of it. I was really, because we really were up against time, and we were able to share those, which was really great. I would have liked to have had a bit more sharing time, but I really enjoyed it, and it was nice to see everybody. Thank you. So I think the haikus are there somewhere. I think Sylvie's got them, so she might put them in the chat.
Do you want me? I can add them to the chat, or I can say a couple now.
Yeah, no, say a couple. That'd be great. Yeah, yeah.
Okay. Quilted forest floor, bouquet held by passerby, become a treasure. Weeping willow tree, wind bends me, I am graceful, the ballerina.
Lovely, really lovely. Yeah, I really enjoyed it.
Beautiful. Thank you, Amanda, and thank you, Sylvie, for sharing a snippet into your workshop experience. And yeah, sounds really beautiful to kind of change your perspective in that way and tune into nature. So next we're going to hand over to Ruth to share about her Reframe Your Now workshop.
Yeah, so it's a bit ironic because the whole point is to slow down, but we actually had such a short amount of time that we did it in quite a rushed way. But we did 2 activities. The first one involved closing our eyes, and then when we reopened them, looking at our hands as if we'd never seen them before, and feeling a connection to them maybe in a way that we hadn't before, and then creating images of our hands. And then inviting people to do a similar activity, but with other people as well. But bringing in the whole area of care and compassion and kindness that we offer ourselves by becoming more mindful of our hands and what we do with them. The second activity, and actually, I think it was 3 or even 4 people created photographs of their hand stroking a cat. So there was a bit of a cat theme going on, which was really lovely. The second activity was we used an empty glass, as in a glass of water, as a kind of symbol for water, and showing and thinking about how water, what comes to mind when we think of water, and the flow and movement and lots of other things, and how things are constantly changing, and how we can use the symbol of a glass to help us build resilience. But we looked at the glass again as if we'd never seen it before, and looking at colours and textures and shapes, etc., and creating images of those. And we were able to share our photographs just by kind of showing, getting our phones or cameras really close up to the screen as much as possible, and some amazing images which we weren't able to see properly, but yeah, it was really amazing what people came up with so quickly. Would have been great to have more of an opportunity to share thoughts, but I encourage people to go and find somewhere near to where they live, or even in their gardens or homes around water, and somewhere that they can go to regularly and get to know see the changes and document the changes.
Thanks so much, Ruth, for your sharing and for your workshop. Again, it sounds wonderful, and I totally understand all of the workshops probably felt like they could have been much longer, and I guess we wanted to really give the opportunity to kind of get a taste of these types of things within a short period of time. But of course, we'll share all of the links to speakers' work, and I'm sure that different people are running different kind of more in-depth or longer workshops. So if you've been inspired this evening, you can delve more deeply. But I want to hand over to the last workshop facilitator from this evening to share a bit from the workshop, Adana, about what we did in our writing workshop.
Hi, yeah, so we had a lovely writing session where I focused on two quite accessible writing tasks that had two different functions. So the first one was free writing, which is a way to release anything that you're holding on to. To kind of, it can be quite calming, quite liberating, and kind of get in touch with your emotions that perhaps you're not necessarily aware of. So we used some visual stimulus for that, as well as a poem. And then kind of moving to a different place, we focused on kind of grounding ourselves back in. So after kind of opening up and expressing, kind of coming back and recentering ourselves in an experience that we'd had in the day, but really taking the time to experience it in a very sensory way and then kind of write about that. So as everyone has said, we kind of ran out of time before we could get into that last section as well as I would have liked to, and get some feedback on that. But hopefully it's given everybody two really, as I said, accessible ways of using writing whenever they want to, and all they need is a pen and paper to support their well-being.
Yeah, beautiful. Thank you, Adana. And I see JL has put, thanks, Adana, the session helped me a lot in a difficult time. So that's really beautiful feedback.
Thank you, JL.
I think that although of course it's somewhat a challenge to do things in a short period of time, it's also kind of an interesting creative opportunity because often we're living quite time-starved lives at the moment, and like Ruth says, we really do need to slow down, but often we find ourselves in that ironic place where we don't have much time to slow down. So I hope that you've been able to kind of feel into the sense of the benefits of creativity, even in the short, limited time that we've had together this evening. So to close this evening's event, we're going to go back to the wonderful speakers that we heard from at the beginning, Jayne and Geraldine, just to share some kind of closing thoughts, any closing calls to action that you would like to share based on your experiences tonight and your work. So I think we'll do it in the reverse order, if it's okay, and I'll hand to Geraldine first, and then we'll go to Jayne, if that's okay. Geraldine, I can't see you immediately on my screen.
I'm here.
Great.
So yeah, I just wanted, I was in the group with Ruth, and I noticed very much that I was really connected to my senses, really attentive to what was going on around me, how it felt, listening to the other participants. And I think that's one of the benefits of creative practice, is that you can kind of engage with something on a sensory level, and that again, when we're remote from each other, there are ways that we can use sensory kind of connection through arts that is more difficult, say, with sport, because it's difficult to do some of the things that might work for us at another time. And also to just revisit what I was saying about the research that the BBC and UCL did last year, and that as well as being something that we can use to contemplate, as Adana was saying, and as a kind of a distraction to kind of relieve stress and to put ourselves somewhere else, such as mindful photography can do. It can also be a means of self-development. We were talking about how you can see a different side of yourself and surprise yourself with what you can do through creative practice. So for me personally, I found it's helped me to see other potential in myself through writing or self-expression that I might not have recognised just from my work life, giving me a voice when, as a clinician, you're often focusing, or as a carer with dependents, you're focusing on somebody else's well-being. Creative practice has helped me to centre myself and my well-being a little bit more, and I hope that the people that have come tonight who maybe were very committed to creative practice, or maybe we're trying it out, might be able to see new benefits for creativity from the sessions today.
Thank you so much, Geraldine. Really inspiring closing remarks on the process you've been through yourself and how that relates to others' experiences. And I'm seeing in the chat box the joy that everyone's experienced tonight, and the enthusiasm to do it again. I guess just before I hand over to Jayne, I just say we'll send out, a follow-up email with links to all of the workshop leaders' work. And if you're running creative workshops yourself and you want, the Network of Wellbeing to share those with our network, feel free to drop me an email as well. We're not going to be running this event as such again, but we're very happy to, we know there's a wealth of work going on in this area, which we're really happy to help support. So I'll hand over to Jayne to share her thoughts.
Yeah, thank you. I think my sort of take home from this, and my call to action to you all really is let's sort of campaign, let's advocate for this role of everyday creativity. We've heard how this has really helped people during this crisis, and quite often, in the work that I've been doing over the 15 years or so, we've been looking at arts and creativity at a point when people are in a crisis or struggling with their health in one way or another. And I'd like us to think about how we can think about everyday creativity, things that we can do, like the things we've shared tonight, on an everyday basis, that actually help to build up our resilience and our resources, and help build up that sort of protective factors for us. And again, I was in the writing workshop with Adana, and there's evidence that journaling isn't just good for your mental health, but it's really good for your physical health as well. And so that link between mental health and physical health is really important. So I think in the way that we've sort of got this, we've got this notion of 5 a day being good for us, and more recently this notion of daily exercise, which was never a thing before coronavirus, being important for us. I'd like to get to, it's an opportunity for us to really advocate for the role of, everyday creativity, taking a bit of time out in the day to do something for yourself and to share that and advocate for that with other people. I just think that would really push us forward a long way in people getting this connection between creativity and our health and well-being. And I've often thought as well, it's a slightly random thought, but I always think, at the end of the news, they always have the sports roundup of what the sports is. And I think that we should be pushing for an arts roundup at the end of the news every night, so we get a little bit of arts news in our lives every night, rather than just sport as well. So yeah, anything anyone can do about advocating for that would be great.
Wonderful. I can see that's a popular idea, Jayne, and I think the idea of encouraging us all to be kind of advocates of everyday creativity is a wonderful note to end this evening on, so thank you so much.